All right, good afternoon, everybody. Zach Sarkis here from New York HempLab, founder and executive director. We are here for number 9 of the New York Cannabis Legalization Workshop Series, where we've been breaking down the recently passed Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, the MRTA, almost line by line, but definitely section by section, providing a comprehensive analysis and conversation as we all learn this bill together. I'm really stoked to be accompanied by my friends and fellow industry experts, Jason Klimek and Mary Kruger. I'll give them a moment to just say hi and introduce themselves and who they are. And yeah, just want to give a shout out to, actually before I give shout outs, so this is our 9th workshop. We're going to take next week off just because there's a couple scheduling conflicts. So our goal or hope today is to finish the adult use section of this bill, and then we can pick up on the next segments. I do want to give a big shout out to our founding sponsoring member, Harris Beach Law Firm. Also a big shout out to our 2021 sponsoring members, Mad Hatter's Hideaway up here in Rochester and the Wagner firm based out of Albany. Your contributions just mean so much, the way you show up to support our community, so thank you. And yeah, big shout out to our founding business members, Boyle and Code, Canamill, Singer Farms Naturals, Forefathers Innovation, Tracy Jong Law Firm, Closed Loop Systems, Dawson Law Firm, and the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. And our 2021 business members, Hellendale, Beacon Skiff, No Wave, Plant Science Lab, CBRE, and the EFPR Group. All your contributions mean so much. We also have a plethora of individuals who have helped support this this platform, and we are a member-supported, volunteer-led entity that's been at this for years. So your contributions mean so much, and yeah, we're just really stoked to be here. As I transition out of that, Jason, you want to take the lead and just introducing yourself, and then we can hand it off to Mary.
Sure. So I'm Jason Klimek. I'm a cannabis and tax attorney at Woods Oviatt Gilman, and also an executive or a director, board of director member of HempLab. And as Zach said, we've been at this a few years. We've been having fun for now 9 sessions, which seems crazy that we're at 9, and still quite a few to go, I think. So yeah, with that, turn it over to Mary. And
thanks, Jason. Jason forgot to mention he's also a director for Rock Normal, so he wears a lot of hats.
Yes.
And I am the executive director and founder of Rock Normal. So we are the Rochester chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. We are a cannabis consumer advocacy organization, and happy to be here and be part of this conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you both for being here. It's funny, I forget to introduce myself, and I wore this shirt and it reminded me today that I am a cultivator. I'm in the process of hand planting, substantially less than we grew last year, but at least 500 plants in a no-till raised bed, certified organic setting on an incredible vegetable and produce farm. Also have launched a brand called Flower City, FLWRCITY, and trying to help bring high quality products to market and help keep the farm afloat. And yeah, I've been actually in the process of partnering with the NYCGPA to sit as the chair for the education committee as we begin to look at what programming and education looks like across the board, across the state to best serve small, mid-sized businesses. So a lot more to come there. And yeah, I'm so stoked to be hosting with these two individuals. Done a lot of work together, and there's a lot more work to come. And with that, we will dive into our presentation. So we are picking back up on section 81 of Article 4 in the MRTA. Article 4 is all about adult use. Last session, we were finishing up about the different licenses. We spent a good amount of time talking about the on-site consumption regulations and what that looks like. And today we'll be starting off with packaging. So again, folks, if you're on this call, first and foremost, thank you for being here. Please ask questions if you have them. We'll answer them to the best of our knowledge. And anything that gets left unanswered is always, an opportunity for follow-up, and we're all learning together. And yeah, folks who are watching this recording, appreciate you and hope this helps. All right, so I'll pick up and we'll look at, so section 81, packaging, labeling, and administration of adult use cannabis products. So So the board is hereby authorized to promulgate rules and regulations governing the advertising, branding, marketing, packaging, labeling, and unconventional methods of administration or ingestion of cannabis products sold or processed for sale in New York State, including rulemaking pertaining to the accuracy of information and rules restricting marketing and advertising to youth. We'll see that last section here a lot. They're really concerned about advertising to youth. Such regulation shall include, but not be limited to, requiring that a packaging meets requirements similar to the Federal Poison Prevention Packaging Act of 1970. I haven't actually broken that down, but I imagine it means, it's things, specific warning labels, as well as, child resistant, child proof. Prior to delivery or sale at a retail, cannabis and cannabis products shall be labeled according to regulations and placed in a resealable child resistant package, and packages, labels, shapes, I'm not sure what shapes this, and products shall not be made to attract or target persons under the age of 21. So shapes may be, if you have you have a setup, if someone has at a retail shop, they have their own little stand, maybe that could be the shape. Or
these are very similar to like the alcohol requirements, where, believe it or not, they can, target below 21. Although it's interesting, alcohol, I believe the standard is you can't target below 25.
Interesting.
But it's not using brightly colored shapes that can attract children and things like that. It's really making sure that you're marketing to those adults. And we knew that was going to be coming. But yeah, and as we saw with the hemp regulations, that's going to be a huge part of the regulations, is a specific what you can do, which is a practical thing for, anybody looking here to get into adult use cannabis on the retail side. This is probably going to be one of your biggest, or not even in the retail, wholesale too, one of the biggest points of requirements, is just making sure these packaging are meeting the requirements, as well as environmental. They want to cram a lot onto these packages, and then are they going to be single-use plastics and things like that? So it'll be interesting to see how this all develops with an eye towards that.
Totally. And I'm wondering shapes too. I'm caught up on shapes. It's like, is it, you can't make anything like a baby bottle or like a juice carton? No, like what shapes would cater to under 21 versus above? I'm not so sure, but it's an interesting thought. All right, such regulations shall include.
It is interesting, Zach. I wonder if I know it's talking specifically for packaging, but the thing that comes to mind for me is like, the edibles that are on the market right now from the unregulated market, or even coming from states where there aren't regulations about not marketing towards children. Like, it's ridiculous, the things that are on some of these packages, like Cookie Monster and things that are clearly being marketed towards children. And so from a consumer perspective, I really like that, we're not trying to market towards youth. I think we need to be careful and keep an eye on the regulations when they start to come out about how much restriction are they trying to put on this industry, because we need to be able to create some type of flashy packaging that's going to get the adult consumers' eye to be caught and want to buy it, but not to be marketed towards children. So yeah, I'm interested in the shapes too, but personally, from the consumer standpoint, it's really good to see this stuff not being marketed towards youth, because it's a concern for me to have edibles in my house and have kids in my house too, when it just looks like a candy that they could want to eat because it's marketed for them to want to eat it. So
yeah, I mean, that reminds me, I had a friend give me some gummy worms, THC gummy worms, and that's like that's a perfect example. Now, do they all have to be square sugar coated cubes? Like, that's debatable, but I do think, yeah, we can absolutely see that there.
And we know that that's been an issue out west of kids accidentally ingesting edibles and things like that, and 99.9% of the time they're going to be fine eventually, but it probably warrants a trip to the ER. They're, could have anxiety, things like that. So it's a serious concern, because at the end of the day, again, the kid's probably going to be okay, but it's medical expenses, it's using up medical resources, all for something that could hopefully be avoided by, responsible packaging and keeping it out of kids' reach.
And I think we've talked about this a lot with the regards to CBD regulations. Like, God forbid one of these like unregulated things, someone dies or something, because if something bad does happen, how catastrophic that'll be, and at least initially to the industry. It's already so villainized that if something bad like that does happen, it'll have really compounding effects downstream. So I think, yeah, we're all on the same page there. So yeah, the number 3 says such regulation shall include requiring labels warning customers about any potential impact on human health resulting from the consumption of cannabis products that shall be affixed to these products when sold. If such labels are deemed warranted by the board, and may establish standardized or uniform packaging and labeling requirements for adult use products. So we already began to see that in the proposed hemp regs, down to what specific font size they would allow or what has to be said on there. Like, you know, not for like women who are pregnant or mothers who are pregnant or breastfeeding, et cetera. So that's just, we can expect to see that expanded upon. Such rules and regulations shall establish methods and procedures for determining serving sizes for cannabis products, active cannabis concentration per serving size, and number of servings per container or package, and methods of separating or clearly delineating servings within a container or package. Such regulations may also require nutritional or supplemental facts that incorporates data regarding serving size and potency thereof. So that's all pretty standard across the board. But again, that's all information that, like, you start stacking it up, like, you're not gonna be able to stick that on a small package. It's like you begin to have to beef up the amount of real estate on the package so that you can have all your information there. 5, such rules and regulations shall establish approved product types and forms, and establish an application and review process to determine suitability of a new product types and forms, and take into consideration the consumer and public health safety implications of different product varieties, manufacturing processes, product types and forms, and the means and methods of administration associated with specific product types, and any other criteria identified by the board. So, you know, basically they're going to have to approve every type of SKU. Every product line will have to be approved, and some may be subject. Like, what if there isn't any information out there? Is it going to have to wait for the New York State DOH to perform research on a specific product line before it can be recommended or allowed? I mean, that's not going to fly, but they could try.
That's what I was gonna point out is, you know, are they gonna be having health reviews, you know, of certain, you know, if somebody comes out with a new form or type or something like that of product, that'll be very interesting to see how in depth this process is for new product types. And then what's a new product type? Is it new to New York? Is it new to the entire cannabis industry? I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so 6, such regulation shall also require product labels to accurately display the total THC in each product. That's pretty standard. And 7, the packaging, sale, marketing, branding, advertising, labeling, or possession by any licensee of any cannabis product not labeled or offered in conformity with the rules and regulations promulgated in accordance with this section shall be grounds for the imposition of a fine and or the suspension, revocation, or cancellation of a license in accordance with the provision. So I'm curious there, like, I hadn't really read that, but like, me as a license holder, if I'm ever found with something that isn't labeled according, where they say, you know, in the medical program, we saw that you have to keep your medical flower in that medical jar until it's done. And so let's just say there's a similar requirement for adult use. Like, if I'm found with something that doesn't have the appropriate packaging, marketing, branding, advertising, labeling in my possession, like, even then, could that qualify for me to be?
Are you saying as an individual, or your product is incorrectly packaged, blah, 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 blah?
What I see is the package. So I'm saying as an individual. So
I think you'd be okay. I don't think if it was like you went to a dispensary, got something, put it in a different container, but you also held a license, I don't believe that would impact your license.
Yeah, I would definitely hope not. It's like, or possession by any licensee of any cannabis product not labeled or offered in conformity. So it does, obviously, we want to read it as if you are distributing this, but it kind of feels like it could be taken beyond that. But I trust your judgment there.
I agree. I just think that, if we're looking at the intent behind this provision, we're looking at regulating the licensees when they're putting products into commerce. I think they're less concerned about, the individual. At most, it could be a fine, but I don't think it would be ever attached to the license unless you were being like super irresponsible with it and like reselling it or something.
Yeah, totally. I think it's also, the intent of this license was to reduce the penalization, the criminalization of cannabis. So I think maybe my reaction to that is still that, like, I'm afraid to get arrested for marijuana. So where we know that's not the intent of this bill. So I think that's also important to acknowledge.
Mhm.
All right, number 82, laboratory testing. Every processor of adult cannabis shall contract with an independent laboratory permitted pursuant to section 129 of this chapter to test the cannabis products it produces pursuant to the rules and regulations. The board may assign approved testing laboratory, which the processor of adult use cannabis must and may establish consortia with neighboring states to inform best practices and share laboratory data. Now, this is interesting. It says processor. Now, in the rule, in the license, processor is different than a manufacturer. So I'm curious if we'll see anything different there. Adult use, number 2, adult use cannabis processors, microbusinesses, cooperatives, and registered organizations shall make laboratory tests reports available to licensed distributors, retail dispensaries, and on-site consumption for all cannabis products manufactured by the processor or licensee. So maybe they're using a little more interchangeable there. Licensed retail dispensaries shall maintain accurate documentation of laboratory test reports for each cannabis product offered for sale to cannabis consumers. Such documentation shall be made publicly available by the licensed retail dispensary. On-site laboratory testing by licensee is permissible, subject to regulation. However, such testing shall not be certified by the board and does not exempt the licensee from the requirements of quality assurance. So basically, you can still be testing and doing your own internal, checks, but you still have to contract out. And that's exactly how the CBD industry is operated. And I think that's just an important third-party verification. 5, as an owner of a cannabis laboratory, testing permit shall not hold a license or interest in a license in any other category within this article, and shall not have or own or have ownership interests in a registered organization pursuant to Article 3 of this chapter, or a cannabinoid hemp processor license pursuant to Article 5 of this chapter.
Again, this is one of those things that it can't be as broad as it's written. And so this has to mean that in the regulations, they're going to define interest as, less than a certain percentage, or maybe tied in with control. Because again, you could argue that this reads, well, if Canopy Growth got a New York license and they're publicly traded and I own a share of them, I can't have a laboratory. Like that, obviously cannot be the right answer. So this is just, another example of where the regulation is going to have to define what interest actually means under the law.
Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating of like, how there's publicly traded, and are they going to give a loophole for publicly traded companies if you own small amount of shares versus, could you own that same small amount of shares in a non-publicly traded company? And it'll be interesting to see if they'll have a double standard there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They could tie it to control, or it could be an interest plus control in private, where it's just interest in public, things like that. Who knows how they're gonna do it? And it's past June 10th now, and we haven't heard of any of the regulators being appointed, or at least I have not. So the clock is ticking on that, because every day that we don't get regulators appointed is probably a day later that we don't get regulations.
Truth. All right. Number 6, the board shall have the authority to require a licensee under this article to submit cannabis or cannabis products to one or more independent laboratories for testing, and the board may promulgate regulations related to all aspects of third-party testing and quality assurance, including but not limited to minimum testing and sampling requirements, testing and sampling methodologies, testing reporting requirements, retesting, and product quarantine, hold, recall, and remediation. All right, section 83, provisions governing the cultivation and processing of adult use cannabis. Jason, you want to take this one?
Sure. So, let's see. Cultivation and processing of cannabis shall comply with the regulations promulgated by the board governing minimum requirements for adult use cultivators, nurseries, processors, micro businesses, cooperatives, registered organizations, and registered organization cultivators. No cultivator or processor of adult use cannabis shall sell or agree to sell or deliver in the state any cannabis product, as the case may be, except in originally sealed containers containing quantities in accordance with the size standards pursuant to the rules of the board. Such containers shall have affixed thereto such labels or other means of tracking and identification as may be required by the rules of the board. No cultivator or processor of adult use cannabis shall furnish or cause to be furnished to any licensee any exterior or interior sign, printed, painted, electric, or otherwise, except as authorized by the board. The board may take such rules as it shall make such rules as it deems necessary to carry out the purpose and intent of the division.
Now that's an interesting thing. I was just out in California and went to a dispensary, and all the different brands have their own little quadrant of the dispensary with their own sign. And it's just an interesting, that interior sign even. So that's kind of like your marketing material on site when you go in. So just like, I'm curious,
they're probably going to allow it, but they're probably going to allow it within a framework that they designate.
And the question is, are they going to have to vet every single sign that goes up, or are they going to set the parameters? And then, I would imagine more the parameter way.
There's technically, maybe if there's another attorney who does alcohol beverage, because I know very little about it, but I'm pretty sure every beer label or alcohol label has to get reviewed by an agency. And I know for attorneys, technically, if we're doing attorney advertising, we should be submitting it to the appellate division for review. So there's definitely precedent for reviewing of every single thing that goes out. Now with cannabis, maybe that's a much bigger market, or not. I mean, alcohol is a pretty big market. So I don't know. I mean, it literally could come down to every single sign or advertisement or whatever needs to get submitted to the agency, or it could just be these parameters that, hey, you meet the requirements and the regulations, and we've kind of said that this is okay. But if you do that, it's a lot harder to enforce, because then you've got to have to just happen upon the sign out in the world or something like that, and it has to be right. So it depends on how strictly they really want to regulate this stuff.
Yeah, totally.
All right. 4. Cultivators of adult use cannabis consistent with protecting public health and safety shall comply with plant cultivation regulations, standards, and guidelines consistent with the provisions applicable to hemp, cannabinoid hemp, and hemp extract, and issued by the board in consultation with the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Department of Agriculture and Markets. Such regulations, standards, and guidelines shall be guided by sustainable farming principles and practices such as organic, regenerative, and integrated pest management models to the extent possible, and shall restrict, whenever possible, the use of pesticides to those that are registered by the Department of Environmental Conservation or that specifically meet the United States Environmental Protection Agency registration exemption criteria for minimum risk, used in compliance with the rules, regulations, standards, and guidelines issued by the Department of Environmental Conservation for pesticides. No cultivator or processor of adult use cannabis shall transport any cannabis product except in vehicles owned and operated by such cultivator or processor, or hired by such cultivator or processor, and operated by a trucking or transportation company registered with the office, and shall make only deliveries at the licensed premises of the purchaser. So that's interesting that it says if you use a third-party trucking, that they're registered. So that implies at the very least that it's not a separate license. They wouldn't need necessarily a distributor license. They need really more, I guess, kind of a permit.
Yeah, and that is an important difference. To register versus to have a license is definitely a big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
in
presumably the
the
registration
hurdles and
for,
costs.
yeah, I mean, presumably the registration for a permit would be a lot less onerous of kind of filling out the application saying, yes, we have the trucks. And we can meet these very minimal requirements. So there's yet another kind of almost sort of ancillary business that maybe people aren't necessarily thinking of, but one that's certainly going to be needed because, you know, buying trucks to transport might be a very, you know, costly undertaking for small businesses. So here's another small business segment that can come in and kind of plug that gap.
Yep.
All right. No cultivator or processor of adult use cannabis, including an adult use cannabis cooperative, microbusiness, or registered organization, may offer any incentive, payment, or other benefit to a licensed cannabis distributor, retail dispensary in return for carrying the cultivator, processor, cooperative, microbusiness, or registered organization products or preferential shelf placement. That's an important one. So no, like, oh, if you buy from me, I'll, you know, cut the prices or anything like that. Other than, I think you would have to, you know, just have bulk pricing that's just generally available, that, you know, if you buy a pound, it's X. If you buy 5 pounds, it's, you know, 80% of X. Things like that. But you can't, and this goes back to the whole, like, this is just supplanting the, or not supplanting, this is supplementing the whole the prohibition on vertical integration and things like that, is you can't have these sweetheart deals between companies that are going to, you know, potentially affect the market. So just another one to keep an eye on. All right. All cannabis products shall be processed in accordance with good manufacturing practices for the product category pursuant to either Part 111 or Part 17 of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, as may be modified by the board in regulation.
That's big. So again, it's New York is putting its foot down and declaring GMP requirements. And I think there's a lot of folks who would advocate that's in the best interest of consumers. I also have heard that, you know, and believe that that's a huge hurdle. So if any small, like, it's such a huge hurdle. So I think that we've been talking about this in other meetings, like such as the NYCGPA, of like, that is it a step, is there a stepping stone process to get to GMP certified? You know, to get a GMP certified facility, like, can there be steps? Because, you know, I don't know, I don't think there are any other states that are operating with adult use cannabis that require or mandate GMP certification. And underneath that, like, if there has, you know, there's been substantial tracking efforts through the track and trace programs, et cetera. I think there are ways to build up to GMP, but to start out the gate, to me, is honestly counters so much of the, like, small business, equity license, accessibility, et cetera, that's been promoted.
I've had this come up with, you know, clients have asked me, you know, do I need a commercial kitchen if I'm just going to add, you know, cannabis to an edible or something like that? Like, you know, I'm making brownies or whatever. And based on what the law says, granted, maybe it changes under regulation, but based on what the law says, yes, like, you need a processor license and you need to be in a GMP facility. And that's a huge undertaking. That's not just, you know, I'm doing this in my home kitchen. No, this is a commercial kitchen where you have a separate license attached to it. So yeah, as Zach said, very big undertaking. And
I honestly think that might be the biggest detriment to the industry right there, in pigeonholing who is going to be able to process and how does that impact downstream. If everything's required to go through GMP certified facility, then of course there's existing GMP processors through the hemp program who've had a head start. But it's really, it becomes a select few who can do it to scale. That's one thing, let alone a small scale producer processor. You know, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars to start up a GMP certified facility. It's not a low lift, and that's just for that facility. You know, in accordance with GMP, or, you know, could it be, you know, there might be, again, what's the stepping stone to get to that point to allow for more businesses to enter, to ensure quality production, you know, traceability, et cetera. I would argue that it feels a little excessive, and it could be a major bottleneck for the industry.
And it would be interesting too, and I really haven't thought about this, so I don't know, but could you have a facility that does get licensed as a commercial kitchen or whatever, and then allows other licensed people to come in and use those facilities, or some combination thereof, so that you're not having to pay for that. You're using more of like a communal thing or something like that. I don't know, could be a way to help small businesses so they don't each have to purchase their own GMP facilities and get that certified and things like that. Because yeah, I mean, that'd be extraordinarily expensive for the small business. I don't even know how a small business really affords that, because you're not going to a bank. It's bootstrapping or private equity. All right, 8. No processor of adult use cannabis shall produce any product which, in the discretion of the board, is designed to appeal to anyone under the age of 21. The use or integration of alcoholic beverages or nicotine in cannabis products is strictly prohibited. The board shall promulgate regulations governing the minimum requirements for the secure transport of adult use cannabis. Hopefully those minimum requirements will not be that you have to state on the outside of the vehicle what you're doing, because I'm pretty sure that was like in the first run of the MRTA, was that on the outside it had to be visible that you were like a cannabis transporter. Probably not the best idea in the world. So hopefully
build a giant target on your just paint a target on your vehicle.
We have drugs and cash and we're moving. Don't rob us. All right. Section 84, provisions governing the distribution of adult use cannabis. No distributor shall sell or agree to sell or deliver any cannabis products, as the case may be, in any container except in a sealed package. Such containers shall have affixed thereto such labels as may be required by the rules of the board. No distributor shall deliver any cannabis products except in vehicles owned and operated by the distributor or hired and operated by such distributor from a trucking or transportation company registered with the board, and shall only make deliveries at the licensed premises of the purchaser. Each distributor shall keep and maintain upon the licensed premises adequate books and records of all transactions involving the businesses transacted by such distributor, which shall show the amount of cannabis products purchased by such distributor and the total THC content of purchased cannabis products as reflected on the product labels, together with the names, license numbers, and places of business of the persons from whom the same was purchased, and the amount involved in such purchases, as well as the amount of cannabis products sold by such distributor, together with the total THC content of cannabis products sold as reflected on the final product labels, with the names, addresses, and license numbers of each of such purchaser and any other information required in regulation. Each sale shall be recorded separately on a numbered invoice and shall have printed thereon the number, the name of the licensee, the address of the licensed premises, and the current license number. Such distributor shall deliver to the purchaser true duplicate invoice stating the same and address of the purchaser, the quantity of cannabis products, the total THC content of cannabis products sold as reflected on the product labels, description by brands, and the price of such cannabis products, and a true, accurate, and complete statement of the terms and conditions on which such sale is made. Such books, records, and invoices shall be kept for a period of 5 years and shall be available for inspection by authorized representative board.
That's a lot.
Hopefully, a lot of that will be dealt with the track and trace program, like the software component will do. Hopefully, a lot, if not all of it.
Yep, absolutely.
No distributor shall furnish or cause to be furnished to any licensee any exterior or interior sign, printed, painted, electric, or otherwise, unless authorized by the board. No distributor shall provide any discount, rebate, or customer loyalty program to any licensed retailer except as otherwise authorized by the board. So that's, the board can authorize loyalty programs, which would be interesting. I wonder if, or discounts or rebates. Wonder if that will be a thing that comes up, probably. The board is authorized to promulgate regulations establishing a maximum margin for which the distributor may mark up a cannabis product for sale to a retail dispensary. Any adult use cannabis product sold by a distributor for more than the maximum markup allowed in regulation shall be unlawful. I wonder if they're actually going to do that, because it says they're authorized to do it, but will they do it? My guess is out of the gate, they probably wouldn't. But then if they see that the retail prices are too high Maybe, but that could also just be a function of wholesale
Well,
costs.
I mean, but it's also interesting. Like I've been dealing with this, like folks who want to be wholesale distributors of CBD products or flower specifically, and they offer next to nothing for the product, and then they have a 10x markup, you know, and it's and like you know they want to someone wants to pay $100 to $200 for flour that they're going to make $1,600 at their markup, you know, per pound. And I do think that it's something to consider of like the race to the bottom for the producer or the small business, and then when the distributor like really holds the reins, it can really have a very negative impact on the business and not help the consumers. You'd think, you know, if the price is driven down, then it should trickle down to the consumer, but we don't see that often. There are some cases for sure, but
I mean, it makes you kind of think about, you know, should I, as a producer, get a distributor license and even just hire somebody to, you know, make those sales and get me into the stores instead of relying on a distributor who could have a 10x markup or something like that, and, you know, keep that margin for myself. You know, the distributor obviously makes it easier because you don't have to pay out of the gate for an employee to do that, for the distribution and things like that. But in the long term, you know, maybe it makes sense to kind of take on that responsibility because you end up making that much more money depending on the margins. You know, if they set a maximum margin of 30%, maybe you say, okay, it's worth, you know, the upcharge a little bit for them to do that because they're only, you know, raising it 30% versus, oh, well, they just, you know, 10x my price. So we'll have to see. And, you know, I haven't heard anything about the maximum margin, but, you know, knowing that the distributor license was specifically put in there, I think at the request of some distributors, my guess is that lobbying pretty hard against a maximum margin is a thing that goes on. So, all right, each distributor shall keep and maintain logs, or keep and maintain upon the licensed premises adequate books and records to demonstrate the distributor's actual cost of doing business, using accounting standards and methods regularly employed in the determination of costs for the purpose of federal income tax reporting for the total operation of the licensee. Such books, records, and invoices shall be kept for a period of 5 years and shall be available for inspection by an authorized representative of the office for use in determining the maximum markup allowed in regulation pursuant to this section. All right, provisions governing retail dispensaries. No cannabis retail dispensaries shall sell, deliver, or give away, or cause, or permit, or procure to be sold, delivered, or given away any cannabis to any person actually or apparently under the age of 21 years or visibly intoxicated.
What is actually or apparently under the age of 21 years old?
So it's, yeah, actually.
You look too young. I'm not going to sell it to you.
Yeah, that's probably like some type of fake ID kind of thing. You know, like Wegmans cards, literally everybody. It doesn't matter if you're 100. It's probably something similar to that. They're, you know, they're covering themselves. But visibly intoxicated too is an interesting one. Like again, it's, you know, carryover from the adult or from the alcohol law, but like visibly intoxicated, you know, can be hit or miss with cannabis, I think. So does that really stop a lot of people? I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see the judgment calls on that one. Like, what happens if you have a bad allergy day and your eyes are red? Sorry, no sale.
And it's interesting because it doesn't say visibly intoxicated by cannabis, right? So I would interpret that to be more like intoxicated by alcohol, but it'll be interesting to see how.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they certainly didn't limit it to just cannabis. So if you come in drunk, sorry, no sale. Yeah, you know, I think, yeah, they want to make sure that, well, considering that the dispensaries are more like liquor stores, you're clearly driving there, driving back. Well, unless you're walking, but, you know, a lot of different concerns there. All right, Valid proof of age is required for each transaction. No licensee or agent or employee of such licensee shall accept as written evidence of age by any such person for the purchase of any cannabis or cannabis products, any documentation other than a valid driver's license or non-driver identification card issued by the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles, the federal government, any United States territory, Commonwealth,
Sorry.
possession, the District of Columbia, state government within the United States, or provincial government of the Dominion of Canada, or a valid passport issued by the U.S. government or any other country, or an identification card issued by the Armed Forces of the United States. Upon the presentation of such driver's license or non-driver identification card issued by a governmental entity, such licensee or agent or employee thereof may perform a transaction, scan as a precondition to the sale of any cannabis or cannabis product. So may perform a transaction scan. So it's not mandated, but just know that if you're concerned that you're buying cannabis and going into a database, it very well may happen. And, you know, I think with a lot, at least a lot of places I've seen where you buy alcohol, not like bars, but like, you know, they will scan the ID to make sure that it's valid and everything like that. So, you know, I think that that's something that could definitely happen with cannabis. Nothing in this section shall prohibit a licensee or agent of, or employee from performing such transaction scan on any other document listed in the subdivision if such document with the barcode or magnetic strip that may be scanned by a device capable of deciphering any electronically readable format. In instances where the information deciphered by the transaction scan fails to match the information printed on the driver's license or non-driver identification card presented by the cardholder, or if the transaction scan indicates the information is false or fraudulent, the attempted purchase of cannabis or cannabis products shall be denied. No cannabis retail licensee shall sell alcoholic beverages, nor have or possess a license or permit to sell alcoholic beverages on the same premises where cannabis products are sold. So that does not limit you if you own a liquor store from owning a dispensary. You just can't have them in the same place. No sign of any kind, printed, painted, or electric advertising any brand shall be permitted on the exterior or interior of such premises except by permission of the board. No cannabis retail licensee shall sell or deliver any cannabis products to any person with knowledge of or with reasonable cause to believe that that person to whom such cannabis products are being sold has acquired the same for the purpose of selling or giving them away in violation of the provisions of this chapter or in violation of the rules and regulations of the board. So that's an attempt to stop diversion. All premises licensed under this section shall be subject to inspection by any peace officer described in the subdivision 4 of section 210 of the criminal procedure law, acting pursuant to his or her special duties, or police officer or any duly authorized representative of the board. All licensees shall be subject to reasonable inspection by the office, and a person who holds a license must make himself or herself or an agent thereof available and present for any inspection required by the office. The office shall make reasonable accommodations so that the ordinary business is not interrupted and safety and security procedures are not compromised by the inspection. No cannabis retail licensee shall be interested directly or indirectly in any cultivator, processor, distributor, or micro business operator licensed pursuant to this article by stock ownership, interlocking directors, mortgage or lien, or any personal or real property, or by any other means. In case we didn't go over that 10 times before. They really want to nail that point down. Let's see. No cannabis retail licensee shall make or cause to be made any loan to any person engaged in the cultivation, processing, or distribution of cannabis pursuant to this article. Each cannabis retail licensee shall designate the price of each item of cannabis by attaching to or otherwise displaying immediately adjacent to such item displayed in the interior of the licensed premises where the sales are made, a price a sign or placard setting forth the price at which such item is offered for sale therein. No person licensed to sell cannabis products at retail shall allow or permit any gambling or offer any gambling on the licensed premises, or allow or permit illicit drug activity on the licensed premises. all adult use dispensing facilities shall make educational materials and resources available to cannabis consumers at the point of sale as prescribed by the board. That'll be interesting. Curious to see what kind of materials the board mandates. The board is authorized to promulgate regulations governing the adult use dispensing facilities, including but not limited to the hours of operation. I wonder if they're going to comply with, or they're going to go for the whole like blue, was it the, blue laws that limit alcohol sales? I wonder if they'll do the same thing for cannabis.
Yeah, interesting.
Size and location of the licensed facilities, types and concentration of products servings offered, and establish a minimum and maximum margin for retail dispensary markups of cannabis products. They could potentially govern the retail markup, which hopefully they have some tax people on hand because they need to figure in the federal tax prohibitions in there. Yeah, that'll be interesting. It shall be unlawful for any retail dispensary to sell any adult use cannabis products for less than the minimum markup. Oh, minimum markup. So that's what they're concerned about, is they don't want the price too low, which is something that's consistent. I remember Axel saying a long time ago that they wanted to make sure it didn't fall below, I think the number he said was like $3 per gram or something like that. That was like their floor. So, that's interesting. That's specifically for that.
We got a question from Laura saying, no coupons, question mark? Kidding, but that's
nope,
funny.
I don't think so. Although interestingly, maybe that won't be the case because the medical dispensaries have sales all the time and things like that. So, maybe adult use dispensaries can allow for their consumers, come in today, 25% off or some such thing, but not between licensees. All right, adult use cannabis advertising and marketing. The board.
I'm happy to run with this one if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Go for it.
So the board shall promulgate rules, regulations governing the form and content of advertising and marketing of a licensed cannabis and any cannabis products and services. The board shall promulgate regulations for advertising and marketing, content included but not limited to the explicit rules prohibiting advertising that is false and deceptive or misleading, promotes overconsumption, depicts consumption, is designed. That's an interesting way. Depicts consumption. So like you can't have any, but not limited to. So it doesn't mean that they will do that, but it's like, you have your Corona billboards where people are drinking a beverage, so like you may not be able to have, like they could maybe regulate that. They're giving room to say that you can't show people smoking, for example.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is they want to really not promote smoking.
Yeah. Is designed in a way to appeal to children or minors, is within the readily observed within 500 feet of the parameters of school grounds, playground, child daycare providers, public park, or library. That's interesting. So just where advertisements can and cannot be. Is in public transit vehicles and stations, is in the form of unsolicited internet pop-ups, is on publicly owned or operated property, makes medical claims or promotes adult use for a medical wellness purpose, promotes or implements discounts, coupons, or other means of selling adult use cannabis products below market value, or whose discount would subvert local and state tax collections.
So
is
that's
in the form.
Interesting, that piece about makes medical claims or promotes adult use cannabis for a medical or wellness purpose, because wellness is a pretty big umbrella. Like yoga is under wellness, right? So is that a yoga and cannabis business? Couldn't it be?
I mean, I think they're trying to kind of loop in all of the, ways to kind of get around the health statements. Oh, it makes you feel better. Well, it's not a health statement, that's completely subjective. So that could be, an issue that they're trying to address there. And maybe the regulations will clarify that a little bit more so that it's not so broad. Because again, like, regulations can really only narrow the law. So it's not the worst drafting decision to make it very broad and then have the regulations narrow it down. But if they made it very narrow, they would have to amend the law if they ever really wanted to expand it further.
Yeah.
Yep. And that, like, is in the form of billboards. It's just such an irony to me that, like, we live in a world that's just overwhelmed by alcohol, and, like, you know, alcohol billboards are left and right, but they say they may limit or ban the cannabis-based one, which is like, oh, that's so funny. It's still that fear mongering that's just rippling through.
Yeah,
personally,
that stigma, you know, I think it's going to be a while before, if ever, that like cannabis is truly treated like alcohol is currently right now, and insofar as it's readily acceptable, fairly freely advertised, subject to restrictions, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And then fails to satisfy any other advertising, marketing rules, regulations, yada, yada, yada. The board shall promulgate explicit rules prohibiting all marketing strategies and implementation, including but not limited to branding, packaging, labeling, location of cannabis retailers, and advertisements that are designed to appeal to someone less than 21 years old or populations at risk of increased adverse health consequences as determined by the board, or B, disseminate false or misleading information to consumers. 4, the board shall promulgate regulations that all advertisements and marketing accurately and legibly identify the party or other businesses responsible for its content. And B, any broadcast, radio, cable, print, or digital communication advertisements only be placed where the audience is reasonably expected to be 21 years of age or older, as determined by reliable, up-to-date audience composition data. The burden for proving this requirement lies in the party that is paid for the facilitated advertisement. Again, it's just like, what about alcohol? And it's just so funny. I'm curious if this will have reverse impacts on the alcohol industry. You know, if literally alcohol is literally toxic, and cannabis is non-toxic, literally, how will this kind of constraint on something that is considered non-toxic impact alcohol, tobacco? You know,
I mean, I think just in general, out west, they did see reduced alcohol sales as legalization came online and things like that. So, you know, there's ripple effects that will definitely happen.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll dive into social and economic equity, and minority and women-owned businesses, distressed farmers, and service-disabled veterans incubator program. The board, in consultation with the chief equity officer and executive director, after receiving public input, shall create and implement a social and economic equity plan and actively promote applicants from communities disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition, and promote racial, ethnic, and gender diversity when issuing license for adult use cannabis related activities, including mentoring potential applicants by prioritizing consideration of applicants by applicants who are from communities disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition, or who qualify as minority or women-owned business, distressed farmer, or service-disabled veteran. Such qualification shall be determined by the board with recommendations from the State Cannabis Advisory Board, the Chief Equity Officer, and Executive Director by regulation. The board's social and economic equity plan shall also promote diversity in commerce, ownership, and employment, and opportunities for social and economic equity in the adult use cannabis industry. A goal shall be established to award 50% of adult use cannabis licensed to social and economic equity applicants, and ensure inclusion of A, individuals from communities disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition, B, minority-owned businesses, C, women-owned businesses, D, minority and women-owned businesses, as defined in paragraph D of subdivision 5 of this section, E, distressed farmers, as defined in subdivision 5 of this section, and F, service-disabled veterans. The social and economic equity plan shall require the consideration of additional criteria in its licensing determinations. Under the social and economic equity plan, extra priority shall be given to applications that demonstrate the applicant is A, a member of the community disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis prohibition, B, has an income lower than 80% of the median income of the county in which the applicant resides, and C, was convicted of a marijuana-related offense prior to the effective date of this chapter, or had parent, guardian, child, spouse, or dependent, or was a dependent of an individual who, prior to the effective date of this chapter, was convicted of a marijuana-related offense.
The issue I have with that is that it's all of them, where I think that it's pretty hard to meet all of them because of that B, that, income is lower than 80%. Certainly there's going to be a group of people that hit all three of those, but I think that they're really leaving out people who could very well be benefited and who would be, the targeted beneficiaries of this law, who maybe hit two of the three, like is a member of the disproportionately impacted community, was convicted of a marijuana related offense, but, was able to find a decent job or something like that. Like that, because, lower than 80%, that means you're in the bottom 20%. That's literal poverty. So, that's a pretty high bar to meet. So I hope that regulations come out and say, if you hit one or two of these factors, we'll take those into consideration.
Yeah, the is, has, and was in continuation is very narrowing. And I agree. I think that having specifically that lower 80%, it's like, it's definitely, it creates a higher hurdle to a higher barrier of entry. And, what if you're in the 21%? What if you're 25? What if you're 30? It's like, it's still like crazy.
And
so Allison says,
30% below, the median income, that's still very, very, very little wages. So it's not like you're living high on the hog with 30%.
Yeah, exactly. So Allison asks, is this saying that in order to be considered a social equity applicant, you have to fall into those three categories?
No, this is like kind of extra priority bonus. So like you can be a social equity applicant, which is the women-owned business, minority-owned business, blah, 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 blah. And then if you're within one of these, then you get, or if you're within all of that, you get extra priority.
Yeah, and Trisha says, I read B as being in the 79th percentile or lower.
Except it's 80% of median income. So you got to do the math on that.
Yeah, interesting. But I appreciate that, Trisha.
So Jason, do you have just a ballpark of like what, like I have no idea what the median income is in Monroe County.
I want to say, and I looked this up a while ago, I want to say it's like 40 grand, something like that. So 80% of that would be what you're in, like 30-ish grand, give or take.
Yeah.
So you get less than 30 grand.
I think there's a lot of people where that's their reality who have had a marijuana arrest or fall into those other two categories. You just, personally in the conversations that I've had, people that I know who are living below the poverty line, like making 30 grand is definitely the reality for a lot of people, at least in Rochester. So, and I think it's saying to give extra priority, right? So it's having this legislation be very aware of the fact that marijuana prohibition has been used as a tool to literally break communities down and take away opportunities for people to have gainful employment. Because once you have a marijuana conviction on your record, even a marijuana arrest, it drastically changes the things that you have access to in society, gainful employment, access to federal loans for school. So there's a lot of ripple effects that happened from marijuana arrests. And I think that, I personally like to see this in the bill because there's been other states before where people who've been disproportionately impacted, especially from lower income communities, have just been an afterthought of legalization.
I totally agree with you. I just wish it was like a combination of those factors so that if you hit two of the three, you still could potentially get that extra prioritization. Just because you didn't make it, or you made $1 over or something like that.
Yeah,
you're prohibited. And I think that just could knock people out who otherwise would absolutely be able to benefit from this type of thing, and who the law is designed to benefit.
Agreed. I'm going to just pick up the torch just because we're getting close to the hour mark, but I think we're going to be able to complete this section in the next few minutes. The board, in consultation with the Cannabis Advisory Board and the Chief Equity Officer, shall also create an incubator program to encourage social and economic equity applicants to apply, and if granted an adult use cannabis license, permit, or registration, the program shall provide direct support in the form of counseling services, education, small business coaching, and financial planning and compliance assistance. For the purpose of this section, the following definitions shall apply. A, minority-owned business shall mean a business enterprise including a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation that is at least 51% owned by one or more minority group members, an enterprise in which such minority ownership is real, substantial, and continuing, an enterprise in which such minority ownership has and exercises the authority to control independently the day-to-day business decisions of the enterprise. I think that's a big one. And an enterprise, for an enterprise authorized to do business in the state and independently owned and operated, and an enterprise that is a small business. B, a minority group member shall mean a United States citizen or permanent resident alien who is and can demonstrate membership in one of the following groups: Black persons having origins in any of the Black African racial groups, Hispanic persons of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, Central, or South American of either Indian or Hispanic origin, regardless of race, Native Americans or Alaskan Native persons having origins in any of the original peoples of North America, or Asian and Pacific Islander persons having origin in any of the Far East countries, Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, or the Pacific Islands. C, women business shall mean a business enterprise including a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation that is one, at least 51% owned by one or more United States citizens or permanent resident aliens who are women. 2, an enterprise in which ownership interests of such women is real, substantial, and continuing. 3, an enterprise in which such women ownership has and exercises authority to control independently the day-to-day business decisions of the enterprise. 4, an enterprise authorized to do business in the state and independently owned and operated. And 5, enterprise that is a small business. D, a firm owned by a minority group member who is also a woman may be defined as a minority-owned business, a woman-owned business, or both. Distressed farmer, E, shall mean a New York State resident or business enterprise, including a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation that meets the small farm classification developed by the Economic Research Service of the United States Department of Agriculture, has filed with Schedule F with farm receipts for the last 3 years, qualifies for an agricultural assessment, and meets other qualifications defined in regulation by the board to demonstrate that they operate a farm operations as defined in the section 301 of the Agricultural Markets Law, and has been disproportionately impacted, including but not limited to incurring operating losses by low commodity prices, and faces loss of farmland through development and suburban sprawl, and meets any other qualifications as defined by the regulation of the board. The New York State resident or business enterprise, including a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, or corporation that is a small farm operator and a member of a group that has been historically underrepresented in farm ownership and meets other qualifications as defined by the board. So F, service disabled veterans shall mean persons qualified under Article 17B of the executive law. G, communities disproportionately impacted shall mean but not be limited to a history of arrests, convictions, and other law enforcement practices in certain geographic areas, such as but not limited to precincts, zip codes, neighborhoods, political subdivisions, reflecting a disproportionate enforcement of cannabis prohibition during a certain time period when compared to the rest of the state. The board shall, with recommendations from the state cannabis advisory board, the chief executive officer, and the executive director, issue guidelines to determine how to assess which communities have been disproportionately impacted and how to assess if someone is a member of a community disproportionately impacted. The board shall actively promote applicants that foster racial, ethnic, and gender diversity in their workforce. Licenses issued under the social and economic equity plan shall not be transferred or sold within the first 3 years of issue, except to a qualified social and economic equity applicant with the prior written approval of the board. In the event the social and economic equity applicant seeks to transfer or sell their license at any point after the issue of the transferee is to a person or entity that does not qualify as a social economic and equity applicant, the transfer agreement shall require the new license holder to pay to the board any outstanding amounts owed by the transfer to the board as a repayment of any loan issued by the board, as well as any other fee or assessment as determined by the board. So essentially, if there's a discount in applying for a social equity fee, if someone buys that new license, they're going to have to pay the difference, for example, or if there was a loan given by the incubator program or by the state, et cetera. Allison, I'll pick that up in a moment. So 88 is data collecting and reporting. The board shall collect and demonstrate, the board shall collect demographic data on owners and employees in the adult use cannabis industry and shall annually publish such data in its annual report. And regulations, the board shall promulgate regulations with recommendation from the State Cannabis Advisory Board to implement this article. Okay, wow, adult use cannabis. Article 4 in the books. Allison, to follow up on your question, will social equity applicants have to apply for the incubator program? If so, how will that work? That's a great question. I do think that they will have to apply. I don't think it's going to be an automated, and yeah, how will it work? I think that's a big question. I've sat on the social equity committee of the NYCGPA, and they're beginning to ask those questions. How do you facilitate this process? That's all going to have to be written out in the regs. So how do we streamline the application process for the incubator program? What resources are required? What are beneficial? Is it centralized? Is it decentralized? A lot of big questions there. So let's just keep our eyes peeled. And then in the chat, okay, Mary, thank you so much. She just jumped off. Great. Well, thanks to everybody who's still on this call. After session 9, we have now completed at least half of this document, I would like to say. Technically, next up on deck is the hemp extract bill that was incorporated in the MRTA, but the bill that is in the MRTA is not the bill that was just recently proposed, and we won't know, those won't be finalized until after like mid-July. So I think we could probably hold off on the hemp regs until we actually see the final regs. So maybe that'll correspond with the tail end of this. And so I think we'll skip ahead, but we'll follow up with that on email. Jason, you got any closing thoughts?
No, I think, if we're gonna skip the hemp, then the next part is Article 6, which I think contains like tax provisions, criminal provisions, things like that, kind of the administrative portions of the law. But for me, the tax provisions are interesting, and we can work through some examples so people understand how the tax rates look and how they're calculated and things like that. And just a reminder, not next week, the 22nd, we will pick back up on the 29th because some scheduling things, but we'll see you back on the 29th.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone who's on the call. Thank you to Harris Beach Law Firm, Mad Hatter Hideaway, and the Wagner Firm for your sponsor and support. And Jason, thank you as always for your time and your knowledge, and Mary Kruger, who's hopped off. Thank you so much. We will see you all soon. Keep in touch, reach out if you have any questions, and have a great day.